Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to our latest virtual tech talk, Introduction to 3D Printing. Just as a reminder, your microphones are going to be muted today. So if you have any questions, just throw them into the chat box and my colleague Manny will be answering them. But we have certain spots where we'll pause throughout today's program and try to answer any questions you might have. We will be emailing you with these slides next week. As well as the recording that we plan to post to the library's YouTube channel. And if you don't follow us on YouTube, we've been doing these virtual tech talks for over a year now, and we've been trying to record them and post them to our YouTube channel. So once again, you'll have that link next week. I encourage you to go check out other virtual tech talks that we've been offering if you haven't seen some of them yet. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and get started. By way of introduction, my name is Casey. I am the Digital Services Coordinator for the Martin County Library System. Basically, what that means is I get to learn all about new, exciting, and emerging technology and then share what I've learned with people like yourself. I always joke that it's the best job at the library, and I say I'm joking, but I'm super serious when I say that because we have all sorts of fun technology and equipment that we get to explore on a regular basis. And I just encourage you to check out the library when you get a chance. I'm also joined, like I said, by my colleague Manny. Manny works at two of our library branches. He works at the Blake Library some days and at the Elizabeth Lati Library in Indiantown other days. And he is also one of our technology library staff members whose role focuses a lot on technology and how we can bring that to our community. So Manny will be monitoring the chat box. So like I said, if you have questions, throw them into the chat box and we'll pause and Manny will be able to ask those. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So today's program is going to be, first we're going to explain kind of the history and process of 3D printing, how exactly it works. I'll talk a little bit about how different industries use 3D printing, and then we'll actually talk about how to get started with 3D printing, because it all starts with the file. So how do you create a file, or where do you get them from? The last thing we're going to do together is talk about how to use the library's 3D printer. We have a 3D printer at the Blake Library, but it can be used by you no matter where you are or what branch you go to. And so we'll go through kind of the process and the steps of how to submit your 3D printing request. All right, so first up on the agenda, what is 3D printing? Okay, so 3D printing we were using the term 3D printing, but a more generic term is actually additive manufacturing. So an additive manufacturing process that creates a physical object from a digital design is the definition of 3D printing. And we refer to it as additive manufacturing because if you think about how things are built or created in the physical world, oftentimes it's by taking like a stone. If I was a sculptor, I would take a piece of marble and I would carve away the excess marble to create my object. Or maybe I have a mold and I pour something into the mold to create it. Well, 3D printing is additive because you're actually building things layer by layer for your design. And I do want to point out the fact that today we're talking about 3D printing, but to start with, I just want you to think about regular printing or 2D printing. If you've ever used a printer before, and I think most of us have, we have printers at the library. For those of you that might not have known, I ditched my printer a long time ago because I could just use the libraries. But when we print something, we start with a digital file or we start with a digital design. So I'm printing a resume, or I'm printing a brochure, or I'm printing a file, a PDF file that someone sent me. It all starts with that digital file, and that is no different than 3D printing. It's going to start with a digital design that then gets sent to a physical machine that then prints by adding one layer on top of another to execute and actually create something in the physical world. So that is just a quick overview of what 3D printing is, and also just the concept, bigger picture of additive manufacturing. All right, so 3D printing over the last 10 years or so has gotten to be more of a common term or a household name than it was before that. But it was actually invented in 1983 by a gentleman whose name is Chuck Hull. And he invented a type of 3D printing referred to as stereolithography. I'm going to ask you to remember that word, stereolithography, because we're going to come back to that in a bit. But basically, the point of this is just to say that 3D printing is not necessarily new. It's been around for several decades. Stereolithography would actually use UV rays to cure or harden resin or type of material in a layer by layer basis, like we kind of talked about before. Still that additive manufacturing for one layer on top of another. So that's the origins of 3D printing. There is some discussion in the 3D printing community that it was actually invented by somebody different. But this is generally attributed to Chuck Hull with stereolithography. So stereolithography is also referred to as SLA 3D printing, and hopefully you can see my mouse, but I'm moving it up and down along this SLA column here. And this is the bigger picture is called that photopolymerization. And I apologize because that's probably not the right way to say it. But SLA, you can see, is using a laser to cure a type of plastic. So these are our materials here. However, 3D printing has just exponentially grown from an industry perspective. And now additive manufacturing or 3D printing there's all different methods of doing it. So that curing with a laser, the SLA, is right here on the left-hand side. I put a little yellow star at the bottom to kind of give you an idea about where 3D printing started. And then over the past 4 decades, how much it's grown and all of the different ways that people have invented to build things using the 3D printing process. For the rest of today, we're going to mostly be talking about fused deposition modeling, which is a different type of 3D printing or a different method. Fused deposition modeling, or FDM, builds layers one by one using plastics also. And it works a lot like a hot glue gun, and I'll explain the process in just a minute. But before we get to that, before we get to how it actually works, I did just want to explain briefly why FDM is so popular and why over the last 10 years. So previously, 3D printing was basically used in an industrial situation. People like you and I didn't have access to 3D printing. We didn't have access to 3D printers. They were expensive. They were large. It reminds me of like computers in the 60s and 70s. Like it takes up an entire room and you know, thousands, millions of dollars, and only certain people know how to use it. That's kind of how 3D printing was in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. Well, in 2009, there was a patent that expired on fused deposition modeling printers, or FDM printers. And so what that did is that just opened up the world of 3D printing for hobbyists or consumers or libraries to purchase 3D printers and use them in new fun ways. So this chart on the right-hand side is basically just to show you that exponential growth of the number of 3D printers sold over the course of about a decade. And I don't have more recent numbers for you. They stopped doing this measurement. This Wohlers report stopped measuring household 3D printers or the FDM models. What they do now is they focus more on the industrial side of the industry. So, but this at least gives you a little bit of idea about why you started hearing the term more and more in the last 10 or so years. So, FDM printers is actually what the library has, and it's what it's the most common type of technology for what we call desktop printing. And it's called desktop printing because, as just like it sounds, the printer fits on your desk, unlike some of the more industrial types of printers that are, like I said, the early days of computing, like just big, meant for manufacturing sort of thing. So let's talk about how FDM works. So FDM is, I like to think of it as basically just a hot glue gun that's controlled by a computer instead of my hand. So just like a hot glue gun, you plug it in and you've got the stick of glue that you put in the back of the hot glue gun. That stick then heats up when you have your glue gun plugged in, and you squeeze the little trigger of the hot glue gun and pushes the stick through the heated nozzle, very similar to our FDM printer. That heated nozzle melts the glue stick, or in this case, this is going to be plastic. It melts this plastic as it goes through. And then the computer tells it where to lay the plastic and where to not lay the plastic. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry, I had a tickle in my throat. All right, so the plastic, or filament as we call it in 3D printing, goes through that heated nozzle and it gets laid on top of this build platform. Now, just like a hot glue gun, the filament will harden as it cools. And so that's why it lays down one layer, and by the time it goes down to lay the second layer on top of it, the first layer has cooled and it builds layer by layer, or it adds, or additive manufacturing. The materials that we use in 3D printing, there's two main types of materials for this FDM method. One is called PLA, or polylactic acid. It is made from corn, like a corn ethanol-based material. And then ABS, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that one. ABS is what Legos are made of. So harder, more flexible. Our particular 3D printer at the library, we use a type of filament called Eco ABS, and it's ABS essentially, but it's just proprietary to the manufacturer that we have. We have a Dremel 3D printer, which I'll talk about in a bit, but they have a specific type of ABS plastic that they like people to use with their printers. So that filament goes to the heated nozzle. It goes on the platform. It's called 3D printing because your nozzle up at the top is going to move left and right and forwards and backwards. Okay, so left and right, forwards and backwards for that X and Y axis. And then the Z axis is the platform, and that platform can move up and down. So as the object gets printed, the platform can get lower and lower and lower, since the nozzle kind of stays at the same height. But as those layers get higher and higher, the platform needs to go down. So that's basically how it works. It's pretty simple, when, in my opinion, once you think about it as a hot glue gun. So an FDM method is great for quick projects, something you need just once, and then low cost prototyping. So if I needed to make thousands of shoehorns, then I probably wouldn't use FDM type of 3D printing. But if I needed one shoehorn for myself, I could 3D print one on the library's 3D printer. And just to kind of explain a little bit more about prototyping, I wanted to give you an example, a real life example of something we did at the library. We have, at all of our libraries, we have idea labs, which are basically spaces where the community and people like yourself can come in and try out different types of technology that they might not have at home. So when we had our idea lab installed at the Blake Library, it was about 4 years ago. And we wanted to give away bookmarks to everyone because we're a library, and with a little eye on it, because that's our Idea Lab logo. Well, we had our graphic designer who has a little bit of background in this sort of thing, at least in design, maybe not 3D design, but 2D design. We had him try to create a bookmark. And so he went to work and we 3D printed his first bookmark. And it was so flimsy, it just kind of, it wouldn't stay on the book. It just kind of, fell over, kind of limp, and wasn't very useful as a bookmark. So he said, okay, I'll thicken it a little bit to make it a little bit sturdier so it actually stays on the pages. It's the kind that you just slide on top of the page or several pages. So he did that. And then the second time, he made it too stiff and it wouldn't even fit over the pages at the top of the book. So you can see where I'm going here. The third time he made it just a little bit thinner, and sure enough, it was just right. It was the perfect bookmark. It worked. It fit on the pages, didn't fall out, gripped them just tight enough to be a really helpful bookmark for anyone who needed it, and a really fun giveaway for us to give. So that's an example of prototyping, that he can just do one, tweak the design a little bit, print another one, tweak it a little bit more, print another one, until we had a really great design. Then once we had a really great design, we could 3D print 100 bookmarks, and we use them as giveaways for anybody that came to our grand opening. So just an example of how prototyping works from a manufacturing sense. All right, and I did have a video. If I was teaching this at the Blake Library, I would love to do a live demonstration, but we're still doing some virtual stuff these days. So I did just want to show you a quick video so you get an idea of what it looks like in reality. Now, before I play the video, I do want to just let you know, this is a time-lapse video. It's a 60-second video, but I think it took like 6 or 8 hours. So 3D printing is not fast, but just so you kind of heads up in advance. So here we go. Oops. Oh, sorry. That's the filament. Oh, 12 hours. Okay. So yeah, so that's 3D printing in action. And you could you see it layer by layer and how it goes. It's very, very fun to watch. I'll go ahead and pause there to see if there are any questions in the chat.
We don't have any questions in the chat.
No questions? All right. I meant to give you guys a warning that I was about to pause for questions. So feel free to throw them in the chat, but we will go ahead and move on and talk about briefly just what industries use 3D printing and what for. One big one that was really surprising to me that I didn't realize, but it makes perfect sense, is doctors who were making custom orthopedics or things like hearing aids. Actually, the majority of today's hearing aids are 3D printed, and that's because a doctor can take a scan of your body, your head, your ear, and custom fit something that is perfectly suited for you. So a little bit further down, I do have prosthetics. So that's another one that you might have heard of already. So especially important for kids because they grow so quickly. Something like a prosthetic might be expensive to customize and have it fit, but then as they grow, it needs to be recreated and recreated and recreated. So 3D printing really alleviates a lot of that cost from that sort of thing. Something else that's been big recently is like houses, boats, and kayaks. I just saw a news report about in The Economist. It's actually in this month's or this week's issue about this development in California. These 3D printed houses can be printed in 24 hours. So we all know the housing market's been crazy, and 3D printing houses could alleviate some of that pressure or that market pressure as people are looking for more space and want to spread out a little bit. These houses can be built in 24 hours. I think I saw that there were 80 houses that they were planning to 3D put in this community, all 3D printed, and the wait list is 1,000 people on it. So lots of demand for this sort of thing, and boats and kayaks as well. So kind of along the same lines, I'm going to jump down again to architects. So if you can picture an architect, they use those balsa wood models traditionally. So, but now they use computers to design buildings, whether it's a bridge or whatever structure, a residential home or a commercial building. They use CAD software or computer aided design. That's what CAD stands for, computer aided design. They use these programs. So they already have all that information in a digital format. So instead of then hand building something from, balsa wood or material, they can just throw it into a 3D printer and bring it to clients to kind of show and tell. So kind of similar to what we're talking about with the houses. I skipped aerospace, and I did just want to mention companies companies known for their innovation, like SpaceX, which is, oh my goodness, I'm blanking on his name. Elon Musk's rocket is SpaceX. That's his company. So they use 3D printing to manufacture things like engine chambers for their rockets. And because of that prototyping that we talked about earlier, they can really refine their design in a much quicker timeline than they were previously able to. And then the last thing that I just started seeing more and more headlines on is medical research. So the medical industry is 3D printing cells, like human cells or animal cells or whatever they're researching. And what those cells do, they replicate from like a real person's, and then they just copy their DNA and their cell structure. They 3D print those cells, and then they can use those 3D printed cells to test new treatments, and doing medical research on artificial cells that are perfectly replicating real cells without treating people with experimental drugs and pharmaceuticals. So they do it to test new treatments, vaccines. It's been big in cancer patients, or cancer research, I should say. I've been hearing a lot about brain cancer research and 3D printed cells in recent weeks. So definitely something that hopefully a type of technology that we can use to bring good into the world. Now, you might have heard me say SpaceX is 3D printing engine chambers for rockets, but wouldn't that melt if it was 3D printed out of plastic? And the answer is yes. So the type of 3D printing that the library does, the Fdm printing method, is we use plastic. So it's called prototyping plastic or thermodynamic plastic. And I already talked to you about PLA and ABS. That's what the library uses, but like we saw in that first chart where you couldn't really read it, all the information was so tiny because it was just kind of to give a picture of how broad the 3D printing industry is. You can see resin is a really popular, these rings here are made out of resin. So high detail resin is a really popular material for things that need super fine details like jewelry. Nylon is going to be something that some 3D printers do. I think our 3D printer, and I should have mentioned, we just got our 3D printer less than a year ago. We upgraded. And we bought a nicer one because we saw that people really liked it and were starting to request to use it a lot. So we upgraded our 3D printer, and I do believe it's nylon, although I don't think we've done anything with that yet. Other types of plastic, there's like rubber plastic, which is what this toothbrush looking thing is made out of. This is sandstone, this little blaster here, different colors. So with our 3D printer, you put in the color that you wanted to print. We only have a few colors at the library. We might only have black, to be honest. But if you wanted a certain color, most 3D printers are one color at a time. But this sandstone, that's why it's kind of a big deal that it's multicolored. And then of course, in an industrial environment, there's 3D printers that print metal. So it melts the metal and then it puts it in whatever design that the file tells it to. So there's hundreds of different materials that you can 3D print things depending on your method of 3D printing, like we talked about. But I did want to tell you my personal favorite method of 3D printing is chocolate. So a few years ago, there was actually this thing in West Palm Beach. It was called Sue's Test Kitchen. And so a couple of my colleagues and I went down and decided to take a look at it. And they, sure enough, they had a 3D printer and 3D printed s'mores. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the 3D printer, and you can see that heated nozzle kind of hovering right above the graham crackers. And it's got a touch screen on the front of it and enclosed in this box. That's the 3D printer. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the actual 3D printed design. It's a little robot on a s'more, on a graham cracker, a 3D printed chocolate robot on a graham cracker with some whipped cream on there too, just to top it off. So super fun, all kinds of opportunities for 3D printing to be on the lookout for. I think we're going to pause for questions right after this slide. So if you have questions, throw them into the chat. But just so to kind of recap some pros and cons, we've talked about a lot of this stuff already, but some pros are going to be the opportunity to create complex designs and for customization. So that's a big one. Again, we talked about things like prosthetics that, you know, really work best if I just need one, but I want that one to be customized to my needs to suit me. That's a big pro for 3D printing, and it can be quite complex. Things like tools and molds, there's no need for that. The prototyping speed, like we talked about with the bookmarks, kind of like figuring out the perfect design faster. And then another one to think about is less waste. So instead of carving away excess material, which then has to be discarded, 3D printing, because it's additive, because we're adding material, there's no waste to it. There are some cons, however, depending on what your goal is. There's a higher cost for large production runs, like we talked about. Great for customization, but if you want to make the same thing 30,000 times, then there's better, more cost-effective ways of doing that. From a material perspective, there's just less choices. And even the materials that we do have, we don't know as much about the strength or long-term endurance of those materials. So those 3D printed houses that are going up in California, I'm definitely keeping my eye on 3D printed houses because the market is crazy. But it will be interesting to see kind of that long-term strength and endurance of how those last. And then the other thing just to mention with 3D printing is it does have lower precision. So some of the finer things that we've seen so far, like those rings that were made out of resin, that's that particular type of 3D printing method. That's using that SLA method, the laser, which can get really precise. But like the way we do it here at the library, it's a little trickier to get more precise designs, especially if they're smaller and have a lot of detail. So just things to think about when you're thinking about if you would like to try 3D printing and what would be best suited for 3D printing. Okay, so we are gonna pause for questions.
We do have some great questions.
Oh, awesome.
The first question is, do you have to program the dimensions of the printing object, such as 5 inches tall, 3 inches wide, and then a drawing?
That is a really good question. I think we're going to answer that in a little bit more detail as we talk about our files, because next we're going to talk about where to get your 3D printing file. But yes, and our 3D printer, keep in mind, is just a finite amount of space. And we have the dimensions, which I'll share with you. I don't know them off the top of my head, sorry. But for example, like I have a little 5-year-old nephew and he's obsessed with Zelda, and Zelda carries a sword called the Master Sword. So for his birthday last year, I wanted to 3D print him a Master Sword, but our 3D printer wouldn't really let me print the Master Sword the size I wanted it. So what I had to end up doing is printing it in pieces, and then I could kind of assemble them together to make it bigger than what our 3D printer actually allowed. So size is definitely a big factor in bringing your digital design to life in a physical world. So great question. I'll try to expound on it a little bit more as we talk about that.
The next question you already answered, but if you want to touch upon it a little bit more, is how many colors are available?
Yeah, so at the library, you know what, I'll answer that in a little bit again. I think we only have black. We used to have a lot of different colors, but our filament, so the plastic, was actually drying out. So it comes in like a vacuum sealed bag. And so then we opened all the colors and we would just change the colors as people requested different colors. Then it got to the point where none of our colors would work. Nothing would ever work. And we realized it's because our filament dried out, our plastic got brittle. And so it was clogging the tube that goes into the nozzle. And so from that point forward, we just decided, you know what, we're only going to offer one color at a time. And after that, we decided people only ever want black anyway. We can only offer one color at a time. We don't want someone to get, you know, bright pink or blue and then like hate that color. So we wanted to pick something neutral. So we usually have like black or white, but I think it's been mostly black recently. I love these questions.
Alrighty, the next question is, for prosthetics, can they be designed hollow for electronics to be inserted?
Oh, I am sure they can be. Yes. So the design is very capable of that. And the 3D printing is capable of that as well. 3D printing, when you 3D print something, there is an option in the software to add what's called supports. So supports are basically just like scaffolding, like you'd see on a building. So I'm thinking one time we had someone ask us to 3D print them a horse. And you know, horses have skinny legs and then a big, powerful body. And so as the 3D printer was printing it, if you think about the belly of a horse, it has nothing underneath it. And so the 3D printer can't print it in midair. And so what it does is it builds scaffolding underneath that, and then it builds the belly and then the rest of the horse. And then how scaffolding works is you just tear it away. It's like it's easily removed from your design. And then you might have to use sandpaper or something to sand it down a little bit and smooth out where it was attached to the horse's belly, for example. But I would imagine that's how it would work with a hollowed out design, like a prosthetic that might need some electronics inserted. So yeah, great thinking.
And our last question is, can the 3D plastic be remelted to reuse it? Such as if you get a model made and want to redo it?
Yes, yeah. We don't do that at the library. We would rather just say, don't worry about it. We'll redo it for you for free. And we'll talk about the costs associated with 3D printing as well. And the only reason we do that is because we don't want our machine, we don't want to do anything wrong, and we don't want to break our machine by reusing some plastic. But there are organizations out there that will recycle old 3D prints. You send them away and they melt it all together, and then they donate it to some some other place that needs, free filament. So good questions. Wow, you guys are really thinking. Other questions?
That was the last one.
Okay, and I think I'll try to expand a little bit more on some of those other ones too, but let's go ahead and talk about the design. So like we said at the very beginning, just like if I'm printing my resume, I still need that file on my USB drive or on my computer to open and then click print before I can send it to the printer. Same exact thing with a 3D printing file. So it all starts with the design, and you can get a design in basically 3 ways that we're going to talk about today. The first way you can get a design is to create it yourself using design software. You can also use a 3D scanner, or my personal favorite way is to use somebody else's design that they have created and put out into the universe for people to use for free. And we'll talk about each of those in detail, but I did want to mention that 3D printing designs are usually in what's called an STL file format, or .stl. So that, just like you have a Word doc, like a .docx or a .pdf or a .jpeg, those are all file types, and STL is the file type for 3D prints. That .stl is a throwback. You remember that word stereolithography that I talked about at the very beginning, or SLA type of the method of printing. So stereolithography is what STL stands for. Or some people also say that it stands for standard tessellation language. So the jury is split on that one, but just keep that in mind. All right, so now we're going to talk about the different ways to get a design in a little bit more detail, but the first way you can do it is to create a design of your own. There's a few different programs out there that you might want to look into. A library favorite that we love to recommend to people is called Tinkercad. It's a website that you would go to, tinkercad.com, and is actually acquired by Google a few years ago. So I believe you can even use your Google account to sign in. At least you used to be able to. I apologize. It's been a little while since I've used Tinkercad now that I think about it. But the pictures on the right-hand side are from Tinkercad. It's designed for beginners. It's actually colorful and actually designed for children to learn the basics of 3D design. But as you can see, you can do some fun stuff in Tinkercad. And these other programs that I have on here are all very similar in what they offer. So you can't go wrong with any of these. The ones in the top left are ones that you would use on your browser. So you'd open up Chrome or Safari and you'd go to these websites and you do it through the web. The ones at the bottom, like 123D Design, SketchUp, and Blender, are programs that you download and install on your computer. So depending on what type of device you have, like I could go to Tinkercad on my iPad, for example. But something like Blender or SketchUp, I would have to download onto a computer to use. So whatever you have, whatever device you have, if you want to look into design, you've got options. Oops. Okay, and just to kind of put 3D modeling, you might be thinking, but how can, Elon Musk be using Tinkercad if I could use Tinkercad? Just like a lot of different software, there's a broad spectrum of the entry-level free version, and then the high-end professional requires advanced degrees to understand all of the features and tools in it, options. So this is just to kind of generally show you kind of along that spectrum. 3ds Max is what professionals use. And I think of this spectrum, it's just like taking a picture with your phone. I can take a picture with my phone, but where I choose to edit that picture may depend on my skill set or what I'm trying to do. So I could use a free app on my phone. I could use the built-in editing software, or I could pay a couple $1,000s to purchase Adobe Photoshop and then use that on a, use that to edit my picture. So all different options here. And this is just to give you an idea about what they are. A second option is to use a 3D scanner, okay? And just like software, a scanner is gonna come in a variety of formats, but to use a scanner, you really need, that's gonna be if you wanna recreate something that already exists, or you want a digital file of something that already exists in the physical world. And as you can see in the bottom right picture, archaeologists have been using this because when they go on digs and they find stuff, they need to kind of take things apart as they dig it up. And what the 3D scanner allows them to do is create an exact file of the way things were laying together, or the way things were connected. So it's been really interesting to kind of see this being used in reality for even in the cultural world. So we've been talking about science and medicine and engineering, but even in the cultural world, this is really important. I was actually chatting with a friend about this not too long ago, and she works in the museum industry, and she was saying a lot of museums are 3D scanning and then 3D printing their priceless sculptures or priceless artifacts, because they can't, it saves them so much money on insurance, because then when they loan out an artifact to another museum for some exhibit or just to get a little bit more exposure, they'll actually, a lot of museums have been 3D scanning and then 3D printing the artifact and sending that, rather than paying for the insurance to cover something that is priceless and irreplaceable. So it's been really beneficial from an educational perspective too, in raising people's cultural awareness, which is very important. And this is kind of just a lower end model, something that just clips onto your iPad. The library used to have something like that, but then the software got outdated and they weren't doing any upgrades. So I 3D scanned my mom, I remember, and then I was like, why do I want multiple copies of my mother? I love her, but one is perfect. So then a third way of getting a file is using a pre-existing design, and this is by far my favorite. And I'm actually going to show you Thingiverse because it's just such a great website. There's thousands of designs that other people have made and generously given permission for people to copy it and print it on their own home printers or printers that they have access to, like you do at the library. GradCAD, Sketchfab, and Instructables are other options to go to. They've got more stuff beyond just designs. But you can see this example on the right-hand side, this measuring cube. We actually did one of those at the library, and it just is so awesome that people are so clever, and it's just great to be able to, kind of benefit from other people's cleverness and the internet and their willingness to share. Another design here, like the left-hand side is the digital design, what it looks like in the software. And then this was 3D printed in white. And it's a little cutlery drying rack. So as the silverware and cutlery dries, the water trickles out through the elephant's trunk and into the sink. And I just think that's super cute. And then other things that you can 3D print. I mean, the world is your oyster in terms of things that you can 3D print. I've been wanting to do one of these little vases, so maybe that'll be next on my list. But cookie cutters is a big one that we get requests for. Little signs you can make, custom signs. I think I've done like cake toppers before, like customized cake toppers and keychains and all kinds of things. So actually I 3D printed something for my brother too. He wanted to mount, he has a big aquarium and he wanted, that's run by like a large power source. So if you picture like a laptop charger, you've got that big brick. He wanted to mount the brick to the back of his aquarium. And so he found the right size mounts on thingiverse.com, and I just 3D printed them, and it was like 30 cents, and it was his birthday present one year. So really great really great things that are out there for free. So Manny, do we have any questions in the chat?
We don't have any questions in the chat.
Okay, I didn't give you guys a warning this time, I'm sorry. Okay, but throw your questions in, I'll try to answer them. We're coming up now on how you can use the library's 3D printer and access it and what exactly that looks like. And I'll show you the website. Here's where I'll kind of touch on some of the earlier questions too. So a big question we get is, why does a library have a 3D printer anyway? Like, why do you have all this stuff for technology? And it's a fair question, absolutely, because people think of libraries as books. And we do have books and lots of books, and we love our books. But libraries have generally, if you think bigger picture, libraries have generally been about giving people access to things that they don't have in their home. And that's where books started. So in the days of the printing press, there wasn't millions of copies of books everywhere. And so it was too expensive to get books in your home. And so people would go to the library to access books that way. Well, now that's how 3D printers are. So maybe you just want to try 3D printing without really committing to it financially or from a time perspective. And so you might just try using the 3D printer or dabble in it before spending a lot of time playing with it. It is addicting, I will say. The other thing you might be able to use a 3D printer is for convenience. So like we were talking about, if you just need one thing, why should you have to buy a 3D printer and then figure out how to design something or find something on the internet? Like, why should you have to do that when you really just need it for this one time? And so it's another reason why the library has it. The other thing I love to tell people about 3D printing, and you're going to see this in just a minute, is that it's just so easy and so accessible. Just like clicking, it's literally as simple as clicking the print button on your printer to print the latest travel brochure that you want to look at. So once you kind of have those basics down, once you find your file, on our end, it's super simple. We upload it into our software and we click print. Unless you want us to do something, and then we'll try to help you with it. So 3D printing at the library is really easy. And I'm going to walk us through this, but just to give you a general idea of our process on our end. We do take 3D print requests in person at the library or through our website. And that's what I'm going to show you the website. So our 3D printer only takes .stl files. So that's the main type of 3D printing file. You'll see others out there if you delve into this at all. But our printer only accepts STL files. So that's what we ask that you send us. Our 3D printing, we actually have, it's not Ricky anymore, it's his team. We have a great guy, Mike, who is very patient and kind and like is very helpful in explaining kind of how it all works. So you'll submit your request, you'll hear from Mike, just confirming like this is what you want. The library charges 10 cents per gram, and it's basically just a cost recovery for the filament. So those bookmarks that I showed you earlier, I want to say that was like maybe a little over a gram. So each bookmark was 10 cents. Cost is going to vary depending on how dense your 3D print is also. So if you picture like a honeycomb, if those honeycombs are really close together, they're small honeycombs, it's going to be more material and therefore heavier, even though it might still be small. Whereas if it was a really looser, a larger honeycomb design, that's going to not weigh as much. So, but estimated 10 cents a gram, everybody's always surprised when it's, 50 cents for them to come pick up their print. Some people like to watch the 3D printer work. Now it's going to depend on how long it takes, but if you do want to watch, we would love to, kind of show you the action. So you'll set all of this up with Mike when you hear from him. We also have figured out how to, our new 3D printer has a camera in it. So sometimes what we've been doing recently is we will live stream a print to our YouTube channel. So if you can't be there in person, or you don't want to be there for the 8 hours that it might take to print, you can actually watch it on your computer. We'll send you a link and it'll just be live streaming on the library's YouTube channel. So that's an option as well. Super fun. And then once it's done, of course, you'll hear from Mike, and you can visit any library branch. We'll send it anywhere, and you'll pick it up. And then whatever cost will be put on your library account, just like a late fee would be, and you can pick up your print. So I am going to take a minute to pause for questions, and I'm also going to switch my screen share because I want to share the library's website. But Manny, are there any questions?
We do have a couple of questions over here.
Okay,
The first one is, do you do demonstrations for small groups, for education groups?
Yes, absolutely. Mike has been doing that lately. And we, in the days before COVID, when we actually had people and groups that we welcomed in the building at all times, we would do, schools would come in, and we would teach this class in person where we'd actually do a live demonstration where I'd show you how to submit your print, and you'd see the machine start to whirl. So yes, absolutely. And I would think that we would do it by request now. I would say with confidence that Mike would totally be up for that.
The next question is, do you have books with ideas for designs?
Books with ideas for designs. That I don't know off the top of my head, but I can certainly look in the library's catalog, and I can email out links to the library catalog for any books. I'm making a note right now.
Then we also have, what is the size limitations?
Size limitations. Okay, I'm getting that right now. Is that the last question, or?
That is the last question.
Okay, great.
We also have someone pointing out that they would love to attend a hands-on class.
Awesome. Okay, we'll try to get that scheduled. We are teaching classes in person. We resumed our full computer lab schedule, pending our volunteer availability. We have great volunteers. We resumed in-person classes, I think in July. So we're not doing the printed newsletter at our libraries anymore. So if you're not signed up for the library's emails, email is the best way to get information on all of our different classes. And then the 15th of every month is when we publish the next month's newsletter on our website too. And we email it out to everybody as well. So like 5 days ago, today's the 20th. So on August 15th, we released September's classes, and registration open for all of those. But I appreciate the feedback that people want to see this stuff in real life, because it is pretty cool. It's so much better to be able to show you. But great questions. Thanks. Let me, Manny, can you see my browser now? Can you see the 3D printing website?
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. So you can go to the library's website or the county website, martin.fl.us. On your library card, we have library.martin.fl.us. So that would bring you directly to the library's website. And there's a few different ways of getting to it, but we like to encourage people to use this search box here. So I'm just going to type in 3D printing. And then you'll see in our search results, 3D printing. And then it brings you here to the library's 3D printing page. This is our new beautiful 3D printer, and it does live at the Blake Library. So if you've ever been to Blake, it's in that lobby area. It doesn't sit here on this table, but it's kind of tucked in the corner next to our legacy card catalog. For those of you that are maybe old enough to remember what a card catalog is, but this is what our 3D printer looks like currently. It is a Dremel 3D 45. And the maximum build volume, okay, so here's the answer to your dimensions, is going to be 10 inches by 6 inches by 6.5. So this machine is more rectangular, so 10 inches wide 6 inches deep and 6.5 inches tall. All right, and then converted into millimeters is there on the website too. So 254, 152, 165. Because the 3D printer lives at Blake Library, this is where we do the printing. It's also where Mike is, our 3D print guy. But you know, we accept files from any library branch if the Blake isn't convenient for you. We do ask that any files are STL files, like we talked about. Oops, I'm sorry. And then it's 10 cents a gram to print. I forgot to mention, but before Mike prints, we have like a calculation that will basically estimate the cost for you before we actually do it. So don't ever hesitate. You can let us know, like, please don't print before I confirm, and we won't, but if you're worried about it. And we'll come back to you and say like, okay, this is going to be $2. Do you want us to proceed? And then that's when you'll say yes. So to submit, oh, you know, I'm going to do a demonstration for you guys by searching Thingiverse. So I keep talking to you about Thingiverse. I have it already pulled up here. So I'm just going to flip over to show you thingiverse.com, which is that website with all different designs on it. So, I mean, it's overwhelming the number of designs that are on here. I thought it would be fun for us to look at different cookie cutters because we do have a great patron that no fail every holiday we get a request for. If it's Easter, we get like a bunny request. If it's Halloween, we'll get a request for a pumpkin cookie cutter. And so we just love getting those requests from people out in the community, and we love seeing all the fun ways that they use a 3D printer. So just to kind of show you, I searched for cookie cutter and there are tons of different options. If I had something specific in mind, I could have done that, but this one right here is a Harry Potter themed cookie cutter. So we'll go with the literary option. And just to kind of show you kind of the beginning to end process, this is what the designer can put whatever pictures they want in here. So you might not always see a picture like this with actual cookies, but then the files, kind of like that little elephant we saw, you'll see the file here. And this one actually looks like it's two separate files. One is the cookie and the other one is the cookie cut part, and the other one looks like a mold that you press on top of it. So this is what Thingiverse looks like. And then if you scroll down, you'll see some options here. It kind of gives you details, not many details on this one, it looks like. Some of them have a long summary here. If I click on two thing files, this is actually where it shows me the files. Yeah, and it does look like one's an outline and one's a stamp. That's what they call it. There's comments. There's a comment field, which sometimes I like to read because it might give you tips on how to print something. So if we have a question, if you submit a print to us and we have a question, we might ask you for the link that you got it from on Thingiverse to go read the comments. So not many useful comments on this one, but just know that that's there too. And then a few other things like how many people have made it, how many people have remixed it, which is, I think, is like making it and maybe tweaking the design a little bit. But I'm going to go back to two thing files here and actually download one of them. So let me just download that file to show you. And then I'm going to show in folder. Oh, can you see this, Manny?
Yes, we can.
You can see my file explorer?
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
Oh, the file explorer? No, we can see the browser.
Oh, okay. Let me just share this whole screen. Yes, share. Okay. So that downloaded onto my computer in my downloads folder. It's this one right here, golden snitch outline.stl, which is perfect. So now that I found my file on Thingiverse, decided I want to submit my 3D print request. We have instructions here, but it's basically click on this button and fill out the form. So I'm just going to show you what that looks like. All right, here is where you'll put your name. So I'll put my name and my phone number. Actually, I'll just put Blake's because I can never remember my office line. My email. My library card number. And you do actually, the reason we ask for your library card number is so we can bill your account. So you do need to have a library card with the library to submit a file. And then here we ask you, how will you be submitting your 3D print requests? And here is where we repeat those dimensions, because, and that's where I appreciate that question, is because those dimensions are very important. So we've got the file upload option, or if you wanted to just bring it to a branch on a USB drive, you can do that as well. I'm going to show you the file upload option. Here is where I'll choose file to attach my STL. I'll click choose file. And now you can see everything I work on. Let's just look for snitch. Golden snitch. Golden snitch. Here it is. Oh, some spoiler alerts for some upcoming things. So golden snitch outline was my file. I'm going to just navigate to it, click open, and then that uploaded it to my file, to the website. Here is where I wanted to touch on that other question, where we have a little more information about the filament color. So this is where we'll list the color that we currently have. And we kind of explained this, like I explained earlier. So due to the short shelf life of 3D filament, we are only able to offer one color at a time. The color available at this time is, and like I said, it's usually black or white. If you had a request and we're planning on doing a lot, we'd love to chat with you. So I will say we have some flexibility in that. And then here is where you might say, I'd like to watch this. Thanks. Or some people say, like some of our regulars who've done this for a long time now, they'll say, I approve anything under $5, or do you have any other colors? You can put anything in here. So any questions, just throw them into that box there. And then you'll click submit. Hi, Mike. This is Casey. No need to print. I'll just let him know, and then I'll click submit. Might give me an error message because I don't have my library card in here. So pull out my library card real quick. This is a fake one. Aha, there we go. So thank you for submitting your 3D print request. Here is where we'll tell you you'll be contacted in 1 to 5 days with an estimated cost and time frame. So just in general, if I submit on a Friday afternoon, like it is right now, I'm probably not going to hear from Mike until Monday. So that's why we kind of ask for a longer time frame, but just to kind of give you a general idea, we do try to reach out as fast as possible. So that is all it takes to find a 3D print STL file and submit it to the library to request it to print. And then, like I said, you'll hear from Mike. He'll say, okay, Casey, that cookie cutter is going to cost you about 70 cents. Do you want me to print it? And I say, yep, go for it. Thank you. I hope I touched on all the questions we had earlier too. But Manny, any other questions in the chat?
We don't have any questions in the chat at the moment.
All right. Well, let me go ahead and just flip back to our PowerPoint. Can you see my PowerPoint slides now?
Yes, I can.
All right. Well, I'll just go ahead and wrap up. And if you have any other questions, you can add them in. But just to kind of review what we covered today, we talked about the history and evolution of 3D printing that started in 1983 and then has expanded across all different methods in the last 4 decades. We talked about different ways of finding a 3D print file. Remember, it was create your own, use a 3D scanner to create a model, or find it for free online, and then how to request a print. All right, I will look into books to see if the library has any books on 3D printing designs and include that information in the email I send you all next week. And that email will also contain these slides, and hopefully I can get this recording up on YouTube before that. So I'll send you a link with the YouTube recording as well. Any other questions? Those were good ones.
We still don't have any other questions.
Okay. Well, I do like just to remind people again, we have lots of classes that we offer. We've been doing these virtual tech talks for over a year, and we've decided they've been so popular, we've decided to continue them, even though we don't have a lot of people joining us today. We are continuing them at least through the remainder of the year, through 2021. But we've also started adding back our in-library classes. So take a look and see what we're offering. We'd love to see you in person. We know it's been hard for a lot of us, and so we just want to offer a little bit of everything for our community. So thanks so much for joining. And thank you, Manny, for being a great wingman.
My pleasure.
All right, so I'm going to stop recording.